What is up, Wizards fans? Welcome to another Believe in Wizards podcast. I've got my boy Greg Finberg joining me here today. Greg, how's everything going?
It's going well, man. Wizards off season's going a lot better than I expected, so I'm excited to talk about it. Excited to talk with you about summer league, about the roster, and everything.
Yeah, since the last time we've talked on the pod here, it's been a total shift in direction. So I think we can get into some of those newer guys and what we like and how they fill out the roster and all that stuff. And we took some sort of mailbaggy questions here, so we'll get into all those as we go. Just before we get going, as always, got to pay a couple bills. So shout out to Stateside Vodka and their Surfside hard iced teas, hard lemonades, hard half and halves, hard peach teas, all that good stuff. They're all delicious. It's literally 1,000,000 degrees outside today. So if anybody needs a nice, refreshing beverage, that's a good way to go. And as always, we're brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, UFC, tennis, all that good stuff. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games. Head to the website today and use our promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% off welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. Also, doing a giveaway on some t-shirts for the show here. We've got our new kind of French-themed Bilal Koulibaly-centric t-shirts with the Eiffel Tower in place of the Washington Monument. And we, as in yes, in French, Zards on there. So if you like that, go for it. And for a certain amount of folks that are subscribing to the YouTube channel for Believe in Wizards, we'll be giving some t-shirts away to those people. So even if you don't want a t-shirt, if you throw us a bone here and subscribe to the YouTube channel, we appreciate it. The more followers and stuff you have, the more discoverable the show is for Wizards fans and things like that. So always appreciate that kind of stuff. And then in the next episode or two, we'll give out those things. The original plan here today was to have one of the members of the Wizards Summer League team on, and they were a late scratch. So Greg was nice enough to jump in here, and we'll be talking about that Summer League team. So maybe we can talk about that person in particular without naming them. I don't want to blow them up too much, but Greg, since you and I have been going back and forth a little bit online here, the Wizards made some moves from their two-way contract perspective. Quentin Jackson is now out, and Jared Butler is in. I guess what's your initial reaction to that move?
Yeah, I like it. I like Butler coming out of Baylor. You know, he's Final Four most outstanding player. You know, won the title with Baylor. Was a big part of that team. He was supposed to get drafted a little higher, probably top 20. He had some injuries coming out of college that caused him to drop. Eventually, he got picked
It's
up
actually
by
a
the
heart
Jazz.
condition.
Yeah,
He's got some. It's the same thing that anybody watched Keontae Johnson, drop on the court during a game for Florida. Like, it's the same general heart issue. So there were some teams that said they wouldn't even have cleared him to draft him. So obviously the Wizards, if they sign him to a contract, think he's probably good to go. But just it is something worth keeping an eye on. Sorry
yeah.
to interrupt you there.
No worries. So yeah, he dropped in the draft. Utah picked him up. He spent a little bit of a stint there, and then went to OKC for this summer league, and he really showed out. I remember watching him when he played against the Wizards, and I was like, this is a guy I kind of want to sign. And there's Will Dawkins again, doing something that I would have done. Again, building his resume, making Wizards fans believe in him even more. But look, Butler averaged 20 points per game in the summer league. He shot 50+% from the field, 48% from three, put up 4.3 assists. He's a really solid player. And I'm not saying he's going to come in here and start or even crack the rotation this year, but for someone as talented as he is, to be on that two-way spot is a nice addition. A lot of the times with two-way spots, yeah, like, these guys are okay, but I just don't see them panning out or even making the Wizards. But Butler is someone I can see making that switch like Quentin Jackson did before he got waived, where he works his way up the rotation through the GoGo, through the Wizards, and eventually becomes like a Jordan Goodwin type player. So I'm really intrigued to see what Butler can do. I think he'll probably start with the GoGo, as most two ways do, especially because the Wizards pretty much have a set roster of 15 or so guys right now. But look, if he impresses in training camp, who knows? But yeah, I'm a big fan of this.
I think it's a position of need too. So you mentioned he'll probably start the year with the GoGo, just given the glut of other guards on the big roster. But the GoGo team was going to need somebody to kind of facilitate some offense there. And when they've been good the last couple of years, it's because they've had good point guard play relative to the competition in the G League. And I think Butler will be on the high end of that. I don't think relying on, Johnny Davis or Ryan Rollins to like be the sole point guard on the GoGo was going to be, recipe for success for anybody. So if worst case scenario, that's all you get from him is he makes life easier for those other young guys. Let's say Vukcevic comes over and does play some amount for the GoGo. Like, you've got somebody you can trust to like set those guys up, and I think he'll make them a certain amount of competitive right away. You mentioned the Baylor stuff. Well, they were stifling backcourt, he and Davion Mitchell, and I actually kind of liked him better than Mitchell most of the time that year. I think they were obviously, we talked about the heart thing, but not a huge, combo guard. So maybe that hurt his stock a little bit, but he's got some MFer, and we talk all the time about, the need for that on this Wizards team. So I think at the minimum, both their two-way guys right now between him and Eugene Amaruya are guys that are going to like get after it on defense. And I think maybe they're trying to send like a very clear message about the type of player they're adding with those two-way contracts.
Yeah, 100%. And we'll talk about, I guess, the third two-way spot and how we should fill that a little later on. But, it's definitely nice to see Will Dawkins signing someone that all Wizards fans wanted. I saw you've been on Butler for a while now about bringing him over to the Wizards. And I was as well after I saw him with the Thunder. So I'm glad to see that it's not just like a pipe dream anymore. When we think a guy should be on the Wizards, like Will Dawkins might sign him instead of Tommy Shepard, who just will keep his guys. And that's one thing I'd also like to mention. If I could touch on Quentin Jackson for a second. When we were thinking about Tommy leaving and the new guys coming in, look, Quentin Jackson was part of the old regime. He was a guy that Shepard brought in from Texas A&M after he was undrafted. He's worked his way up through the GoGo, but he's not Will Dawkins' guy. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. Like, there's not that like connection or attachment to a lot of the guys on the roster, especially if you weren't someone that Will Dawkins brought in. And we saw that here. One of Tommy Shepard's guys gets waived, and Will Dawkins brings over one of his guys. So, I think we'll see a lot more of that.
Yeah, it's a good call to bring up Jackson here too. And I think obviously he was better for the GoGo, in my opinion, last year than he looked at any point during Summer League. He just didn't seem to kind of fit with the rest of those guys, and never really looked comfortable. But you've got a guy that's essentially like a point guard size and build. He's got, crazy athleticism, but at the end of the day, not really going to do much for you other than slash and finish in transition. The ball handling hadn't fully come around. The shot hasn't really come around. He was a bad defender in college. I know that's surprising to some people who see such an athlete, but just being that slight was tough for him, and he hasn't really bulked up a ton yet. I wouldn't have minded if he stayed on a two-way, but I don't, if pretty quickly he's not in your long-term future, I'm very cool with them like moving on and just saying like, all right, let's use the spot on another guy. So I wish him well. I hope he ends up somewhere that they can make the best use of his skill set. But I'm cool with Dawkins and them just saying like, all right, we tried it. We saw all we needed to see, and we're good moving on here quickly, rather than like, when Tommy kept guys like Jordan Shackle and things like that on a two-way much longer and never gave them an opportunity to play up or really seriously let them see what they would look like with Wizards minutes. It's one of those things that if you're never going to give them a real look, I don't really understand using a two-way spot on them. And I don't mean that as a knock on Shackle, but he just never really got any real like NBA minutes to see if he could hang at that level. So if you don't trust him enough to plug him in at any point in time, why keep him on a two-way at that point?
Yeah, we saw this with J Huff as well. I thought J Huff played really well at the end of last season. He's putting up like consistent 10 and 6. He was shooting threes, and I thought he could be that third center. But again, someone that Tommy Shepard brought in at the end of last season. Will Dawkins didn't bring him in, and he let him walk. I think he's on the Nuggets now. But another example of Will Dawkins trying to not only just change the team, but change the culture as well, kind of reset everything, bring in a bunch of new guys and guys that he trusts and evaluates instead of what Tommy Shepard trusted and thought was good talent for the team. And I think we saw that with Quentin. I'm not going to say he knew it. I haven't talked to him, but he was pressing a lot in Summer League. He was doing it way too much. He was forcing drives, forcing shots, and you got to think it was in the back of his head that he really needed to show up and play well to earn that two-way spot. And I think he ultimately played a little too hard in terms of pressing and hunting his shot, and ultimately played himself off the team to where he gets waived and Butler comes on now as the two-way spot.
I'm glad you mentioned Jay Huff. I was kind of like 50-50 on that one. I liked Huff enough, but given his age, probably not in anybody's long-term plans here. But this Wizards roster is kind of undersized, in my opinion. There aren't like a ton of natural centers left on it. So Huff was a guy I thought, even if you had him on something like a two-way, he could have come in and probably played real minutes for you, at least until the midway point of the season when you figure out you know what to do with the glut of forwards you have and things like that. So it would have been kind of a 50-50 one for me. I do think that the other two-way spot you should strongly consider a big, and I would maybe zig a little bit compared to what other people would suggest. I usually love using those spots on like super, high ceiling kind of guys, but I wouldn't mind like the super senior, older guy who could just come in right away and play like reasonable minutes for the Wizards team and actually do a little bit of both. And to me, sometimes the two-way spots are best used on guys that can play a little bit for both teams. They may not actually be long-term projects for you, but they're also going to raise the level of the go-go too. So if you do have to play Koulibaly some minutes down there or whatever, like they're playing around like real competent adults who will make their lives easier. And then those guys don't have to press too much. So any thoughts, Greg, on what you would do or any names specifically you'd like to see them consider with that remaining two-way spot?
For me, the first person that came to mind was Devin Dotson,
Hmm.
undrafted out of Kansas a couple years ago, played for the Bulls, came over to the Wizards, and he's played really well the last, I think he was here this year and a little bit of the year before that. He's a point guard, and like you mentioned, we are pretty undersized on the go-go as well, but I think he has real skills that can translate not only to the go-go, but if we need a guard that we can call up to the NBA, we called him up a couple times last year, and he wasn't that bad. He's a decent 3-point shooter, and he runs the offense the way that a guy from the go-go should. He's not gonna be Tyus Jones. He's not gonna be getting 10 assists, but I think he's a real good player, and I'd like to see him at that third two-way spot. Um, Obviously, you mentioned Tristan Vucevic. That's pending his buyout. He was on loan from Partizan to another team overseas, so I'm not sure if he's going to be coming over. But if he does, I had him as a C plus in my summer league grades. A lot of people got on me for that, rightfully so. I know it was a bit low, but I saw a lot of things that he can improve on, and I'd rather him do that at the go-go level instead of the Wizards. So I think a year with the go-go for Vucevic could really help his game. Dejan Vasiljevic, great shooter out of Miami, played for the summer league team. He had one really good game. He was 4 or 5 from 3, put up 14 points. And then another game where he was over 6 from 3, so a little inconsistent, but altogether I like what I saw from him. And then there's two bigs, Kyle Alexander, Osuni. Osun has amazing potential. He didn't really play much in summer league, which I was a little bummed about, but I really think he has a lot to show in his game. And Alexander ran the floor really well, protected the paint, and I wouldn't mind. That's 5 names. I know I gave you a lot for one spot, but if we sign any of those guys to the third two-way, I wouldn't be bad. And I'm sure there's a lot of outside candidates, but that's a lot of like speculation. We don't know if they're going to get signed anywhere. But strictly speaking of in-house candidates, these would be my 5.
So Alexander signed overseas. I forget which
Okay.
EuroLeague team, so he's probably off the table at this point. I would imagine. I would assume Dotson is probably in the similar boat to Quentin Jackson. I would think the new front office probably watched some tape on guys like that already. You mentioned the shooting. Last year was like the first year he's ever shot particularly well from 3 on much lower volume than normal. In I guess 64 G League games, he's a career 30% 3-point shooter. If you're under 6 feet tall and you're not a great athlete, he's fast as shit, but he's not like a Quentin Jackson athlete, and the shooting is still sort of questionable. I think I would be happy to move on for that, just given that you have Butler already, probably somewhat redundant. So that's the only pushback I would have on those, I think.
That's fair. Yeah. I mean, especially like we see with like the guys like Marquise Noel. He's a pretty good 3-point shooter. A lot of the undersized guys. So that is the one thing that Dotson has had on his for a while now. But I do like his point guard skills, and I think he can really provide something if he's at that third two-way spot.
You mentioned Asuni. I agree with you there. I think again maybe because he's older, they didn't give him much of an opportunity. He's already 24 as a rookie, but this guy with a 7'8" wingspan who runs the floor really well. I mean, I think that alone would be kind of interesting. Maybe he's still a little on the thin side to play major NBA minutes, but talking about just incumbents from last year, Travion Williams, I don't believe is signed anywhere. He was reasonably productive for the Go-Go last season. About 7 points, about 5 rebounds, or no, excuse me, about 8.5 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, Not much in terms of stocks, blocks or steals, but he's productive on the boards. Not a very good 3-point shooter for most of his time, but again, on really low volume. So he's basically just like an energy big. I don't know what else you get from a 6'8" center coming in at this point if he can actually play NBA minutes. And the other one would be Makur Maker. Played 44 games with GoGo last year, averaged about 7 points, 5 rebounds, 1 block, 32% from 3 on 3 attempts. I think a lot of that had to do probably with shot selection too. He was just kind of hoisting them up at a certain point in the season, but maybe if those are in-house guys that consider, I don't know. I liked 2 guys from last year's draft class, 2 bigger guys, Jake Stevens out of Chattanooga and Liam Robbins out of Vanderbilt, both 7-footers that were insanely productive as basically super seniors in their college season here. Robbins put up 15 points and 7 rebounds for Vanderbilt in the SEC, 3.2 blocks per game, and was 37% from 3. That would be intriguing to me. He probably didn't get drafted because of age, and he also hurt his leg at the end of the season, so he didn't play Summer League. Maybe he's not healthy. Stevens averaged 22 points, 10 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 2 blocks, shot 41% from 3. Probably the best shooting center in last year's draft class. But again, played at Chattanooga and is already 23. So maybe that doesn't help them because neither of these guys are super athletic. They're not switchable. They're both probably drop coverage bigs. But I think that would be okay at the G League level and maybe for somebody just playing spot minutes on the Wizards team. So 2 names that I don't see signed. Stevens played Summer League for the Kings, kind of barely played because they were prioritizing some other bigs that they'd expended draft capital on. So just names I would kick around. But either way, I'm going to trust these guys to pick somebody good and keep it moving. I was a little skeptical of the Amaruya pickup, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, to touch on Eugene Omoruyi, we played Detroit. I'm sure you remember last year we needed the Gafford buzzer beater. That could have been a very low point in the season for us. We played terrible, absolutely terrible against the Pistons, and he played very well. I mean, he didn't score that many points, but he's the glue guy that's going to be in the right spot at the right time. He's going to defend hard. He's going to rebound. So I don't hate the pick. I wouldn't mind bringing him up. Obviously, he has NBA experience, but he's not going to take over games in the G League. So if you see a lot of box scores with Eugene and he's not putting up great numbers, I wouldn't be too concerned. That's not his game. He's not a box score guy, so he's a guy that you just got to watch to really understand why he got this 2-way spot. So I like it. I'm a big fan of him in the 2-way spot.
All right, let's kind of just sum up Summer League in general. You put out your grades, which were really interesting to go through. So for anybody who hasn't seen those yet, where can they find those?
Bolts Forever.
There you go. Great plug. Just in general, Greg, is there anyone on this Summer League roster that you looked at and thought this guy can immediately come in right away and be a rotation player for the Wizards?
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, I think Bilal speaks for itself. Right now, I'm not entirely sure. I had a lot of people telling me he should be starting. He should be day 1 shooting guard or small forward. I'd love that, but I don't think he's ready. I think he can be a rotational player on this team for sure. I think he should be getting minutes over guys like Shamet, who I don't think is in our immediate future. Although Shamet's obviously better than him, but again, like you mentioned, what does that do for us if he's not going to be here for a while? I think he definitely should get some minutes there. So I would say Bilal. I don't think he should start, but I think he can play right away. Obviously, Johnny Davis. That was another polarizing one for me. A lot of people thinking that I gave him too high of a grade. A lot of people thinking I didn't give him high enough of a grade. But look, he averaged 8 points last Summer League on terrible shooting splits. He doubled that, led the team in scoring. What else do you want the guy to do? He was picked 10th. He should have been picked probably in the late teens. So you can't really hold that against him that he got picked way too high. I think if he was drafted 18th to 20th last year and he put up these numbers, you'd be saying, all right, he's pretty good. So I think he should play. And not only do I think he's a rotational player, I hope he's a rotational player. Again, all of these veterans that we have on our team that we might trade at the deadline doesn't move the needle for me if we play them. Playing Johnny, playing Bilal, getting them better, I think they're ready, and they're not going to be amazing, but these minutes are much better than minutes in the GoGo with the GoGo for them. I don't think Vucevic is ready, as I mentioned earlier. Didn't really think he had a great summer league. That's just my grade on him. One guy I will mention is Ryan Rollins. I had him at a B plus. I really liked what I saw from him in summer league. He's got to keep the turnovers down. He was a little reckless with the ball, but he had a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, and that's with me not thinking he took care of the ball particularly well. So I do think he can carve out a little spot for him. I think I can pencil him in as that third point guard behind Tyus and Delon. He can score as well. It's not like he's just a facilitator and a passer. He was able to get to his spots. He was able to finish through contact. So I really liked what I saw from him. And Xavier Cooks, I didn't think he was going to be on the roster, but they put him there anyway. He had a good summer league, and I know a lot of guys are a little down on him because he's 28. He's old compared to the guys that we're trying to bring in, but he's a good player. I mean, he does everything well. He put up 13 points and 8 rebounds in 2.5 realistically summer league games. A lot of that did come in garbage time, but he still looked like he belonged in the NBA when he played, and he's only going to keep getting better. I mean, this guy just won MVP of the Australian League, which really a lot of people aren't going to think is that impressive, but it is really impressive. So I would wait a little bit on Xavier Cooks. I understand he's old, but I think Cooks, I think Coulibaly, Davis, and Ryan Rollins are 4 guys that can realistically play this season for the Wizards.
Nope. No thoughts on Patrick Baldwin, or just don't think he can be a guy that can come in there and stretch the floor a little bit?
That was one for me. I had Baldwin at a C plus. That was the same thing that I got hate for
Vucevic.
Tristan Vucevic. I think Baldwin can be a good player. I compared him to MPJ in my article. He's 6'9". He has a really good shooting form, great shooting stroke, knocks down threes when he's open, defends well, great size, great length. It's the consistency for me. For someone to shoot so poorly at 27.3%, when you're labeled a three-point shooter, you should be shooting way better than that, especially against this level of competition. You should be shooting better than that, and I just didn't see enough. I'd be inclined to play him over Anthony Gill, maybe over Xavier Cooks because he's young and I think he can develop, and I don't see those guys helping us in the future when this rebuild starts getting into the year 4, year 5. But this year I don't think he has that roster spot yet, and he very well may have it just because we're very weak in the power forward position behind Kuzma. We don't have too many guys that are really eye catching. So maybe he cracks that if he has a good training camp. But for me right now, I would still play Cooks and Gill. I think they give us better chances to win than Patrick Baldwin.
Do we want to win? I guess that's the only question.
Yeah, that's a debate we can have at another time.
Yeah, I think a couple of things you mentioned there. I like the idea, and this is going to be hideous basketball, and people might be angry at me for saying this, but I kind of want to see a Johnny Davis, DeLon Wright, Bilal Coulibaly, Deni Advija line up at some point, and I don't care who you put at center. It could be Cooks even, and just let them be as switchable as you want and just try to cause mayhem defensively. I just want to see something like that. And I think for somebody like Davis and even Coulibaly playing next to DeLon Wright is probably good for them to learn some of his habits and, see what he sees out on the floor there. So I'm kind of looking forward to that, at least in some form or fashion.
Yeah, I'm very excited for it. Look, Johnny Davis is a really good defender, and I think that's going to surprise a lot of people. I saw some guy tweeted about a bunch of, I think it was Brett Usher, a bunch of guys from his draft class that I think can be good defenders, and you said Johnny Davis. He had a really bad rookie season. We can all admit that, but the defense was never something I questioned, and I'm still holding firm on the fact that he's a good defender.
We've got to hold out hope for that at least, because if we're banking on the offense at this point, it gets a little scarier. All right, we talked about a good defender there with a little questionable offense, so that's my segue into Deni Advija. Sorry for anybody who's about to get mad at me for that, but it's how I see it. Made the decision to sit out of FIBA basketball this summer. I think that's a good move. I mean, it's a good move from the Wizards' perspective, and selfishly, I care more about things from the Wizards' perspective than I do Denny's individual perspective. So, sorry, fans of Israeli basketball, for that one, but come into this year fully healthy, make a real run at it. You're going to have real opportunity, and just see like what we can get. If a lot of the pushback from Denny fans and maybe Denny himself is that he didn't have like the opportunities or the usage to play the way he wants to play and can be the most effective, like you don't really have that argument or that excuse with this year's roster. Like you'll have every opportunity if you were playing well, like you're going to keep playing with your group. There's nobody you're stuck behind. There's no reason that he can't play next to Kuzma. So Kuzma being back, I don't think is any barrier or gateway to keeping Denny on the court. Like this is the year for him, and you're going into that contract year. The Wizards have to decide kind of early here, like what they're doing with you. So if you're Denny and you want to make the most out of this year and your contract situation, like I think this is the right move for him too, personally, as much as other people may want to see him play more this summer. Like get him reps up in the gym with Wizards people. I know he's working with a shooting coach. Have that guy come to DC for a while. Have an assistant coach that's going to be there working with them too. And maybe some of these other Wizards can be in the mix. And the more they get to gel preseason, I think is to the Wizards' benefit.
I'm with you 100%. Obviously, it's like from a Wizards fan's perspective, to be a little selfish here. Obviously, I'd prefer he doesn't play in the FIBA World Cup qualifiers. But like a little background, and I got to shout out the Sports Rabbi. He had the article and the information here. Basically, Denny picked up what I think is like a calf injury, and it's pretty minor, but they were a little unsure, so they flew out Carlos Bustamante, who's the assistant athletic trainer of the Wizards. The Wizards just wanted to be cautious and check it out. And when they went to Israel, I guess he decided that it would be best if he didn't play. I saw the Israel national team coach was really pushing for Denny to play, and rightfully so. I mean, he's a big part of their team, being their only NBA player. But ultimately, the Wizards have final say, and they decided that he shouldn't play. This is the second summer, I believe, in a row where we had a little bit of like an injury scare type thing with Denny, and it sucks because if this guy has a full off season and he just gets his shot right, you never he can be one of the best players on his team, but for him to keep going through injuries like this, especially after fracturing his ankle in year one, it's definitely tough to see. But look, in terms of Denny, he needs to be a little selfish here as well and take himself out. Understand that he's about to have the opportunity to make life-changing money if he has a great year, being in a contract year. So, get healthy, get working on your jump shot, get in the film room, try to be as best as you can. I would assume he starts this year. That's just me. But he's going to have ample playing time and ample minutes and ample opportunities to show out and show the new front office why they need to give him an extension. I don't know what that extension is going to look like, but in a contract year, I don't think it's smart to play World Cup qualifying. I think he has to focus on himself, be a little selfish.
If you're even just like a little bit nicked up, it's just not worth the risk. I mean, like we talked about last year, the injury being maybe worse than originally reported and things like that. And who knows, like what kind of impact that had on him the whole season. So I'm with you there. You mentioned the starting lineup. That's one of the questions we got, and we can like kind of rapid fire through these mailbaggy questions here to close the show out. But Sean on Twitter asked just sort of possible starting lineups and who you think should be the starter at the 3. So sounded like Denny at the 3, most likely. What would you go with the other spots here?
For me, as of right now, point guard Tyus Jones, shooting guard Jordan Poole, small forward Deni Advija, power forward Kyle Kuzma, center Daniel Gafford. I think that's probably about 50% of the fan base is going with that. And now I'll say this, I want position battles at the point guard position. I think DeLon Wright and Tyus Jones are pretty similar. Different play styles. DeLon's more defensive oriented. Tyus is a little more offensive oriented. But I think I would be fine with either, honestly. In terms of running the offense standpoint, I'd prefer Tyus, so that's why he has the edge for me. And then at the shooting guard, it's pretty simple. Jordan Poole, he's going to be great. He's going to get shots and he's going to score. And I'm very excited for him there. I don't think that's much of a competition. Same with Kuz at the 4 and Gafford at the 5, being that we don't have much front court depth. The real debate for me, and I tweeted out a poll earlier, I think it was 70% Denny, 30% Corey to start at the small forward. Like I said earlier, I would go with Deni Advija at the 3. I just think we have enough offense in this lineup, especially if you're starting Tyus. We need defenders. Gafford is a great rim protector. Denny would be that defender. He'd guard the other team's best player. and I think he would round out that starting five. I'm not saying I'd be opposed to Corey starting, but I think if Corey starts, the defense would definitely slip up, and Denny should be that starting small forward.
Yeah, I think just having Poole and Kuzma on the court together, you probably want a guy that can kind of help play make for them a little bit, and maybe that's the opportunity there for Denny. There's some spacing around him. I think Tyus probably shoots it better this season than some of the other point guard options they have. So basically, the other three guys will all shoot it well enough that you have some space for Denny to operate. And just given his contract situation, I think it makes sense to just throw him out there with these other guys and see if he makes sense around them and you want to invest longer term. Can kind of wait it out with the Corey decision a little bit. And if Denny's not here post All-Star break, then you start Corey the second half of the year. So I'm totally with you there. That also answers another question from Wizards Muse, who wanted to know, should Tyus Jones start? So sounds like we both think that he at least will. I don't know if I would want to start him longer term or what that looks like, but I'd at least give it a shot out of the gate. I will say 8 to 10 games is all I'm giving these guys with kind of the starting rotation. If somebody's clearly not working out with that group, I wouldn't sit on this for too long. And, that 8 to 10 games is enough sample size, I think, to really tell if those guys are working together or you need to make a change. The other thing he asked is if Tyus Jones should be a part of the Wizards' long-term plans. I would say no, personally. Just 27, a little undersized, never going to be like a great defender. I think he puts in some effort, but it's still some of the same issues we had with Monte Morris, and they're good players, but you probably, even if Jordan Poole gets back to the player we saw in the playoffs for the Warriors, he's still got some holes, and I think Tyus is probably not the guy best suited to complement, what Poole does well and doesn't do well. So thoughts on Tyus Jones?
Yeah, I definitely want him here for this season. I think he's a really good point guard. We saw him start filling in for Ja Morant when he went down, and then with the suspension as well, and he played very well, led them to or kept them at least in contention for a top seed in the West. So I really want to see what he has to offer. A lot of times, like we saw with Monte, you're a little overshadowed when you're behind the point guards like Jamal Murray, behind Ja Morant, and when you go to a new team, it's a little bit of a transition. Monte started pretty slow last year, kind of found his groove towards the middle to end of the season, and hopefully that's not the case with Tyus. Obviously, it's different when you're coming off the bench for 4 or 5 years of your career, and now you're starting.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of an adjustment. So I hope that he can hit the ground running, and that we don't have to have conversations about switching to DeLon Wright like we did last year. So that's just that's what I would hope.
Sean also asked, how bad do the Wizards have to be next year for David Vanderpool to end up the head coach at the end of the season? I don't think it happens next season at all, unless it's like a total dumpster fire out of the gate. And, let's say that those guys just aren't gelling. There's no development. There's infighting, unless it's a total mess. I don't think there's any world where Wes Unseld doesn't get the full year. But I do think adding Vanderpool and Brian Keefe puts some pressure on Wes that, hey, your replacement could be on the bench with you right now. So you better bring your A game.
I think he's a great coach. I tweeted out when he got hired, Dame was really, really annoyed that the Blazers didn't retain him, or that he didn't get a head coaching job. I think it was 2-3 years ago when he was making the rounds, and he's been getting interviews for head coaching jobs the last couple of years. So it's a great assistant. Top of the line, some guy that could be a head coach in this league, and you're fortunate enough to have him as your number 2 or number 3 on the bench. So I wouldn't say Wes has to look over his shoulder. The GMs might be out, but Ted is still here. He's a guy that likes to let guys coach out or play out their contracts before doing much. So I think he's here for the full year, especially considering we're in a rebuild. The pressure has been lifted off his back. But if he does get fired, that is the guy, and we don't have to talk about it every second. Like, oh, he made a mistake, let's fire him and bring in Vanderpool. But I think he's a very capable coach, and if that did happen to be the case, I wouldn't mind it. I think he's going to be great wherever he lands. He'll be a head coach soon.
Yeah, totally agree. One big surprise from this roster, is there one player that you think could have a bigger year than people projected?
Corey Kispert's a guy that's not going to go get his own shot. He needs someone to set the table, and it was nice to have Monte last year because he was setting the table, giving him a bunch of good looks, but he didn't play too much with Monte. He was a lot of times with the second unit, and then when DeLon went down, it was Goodwin or it was another point guard filling in. And you saw like when he has some guys that run the offense well, space the floor, get him the ball in good spots, he's gonna make his shots. He shot 40+% from three last year. So I think in a system with a lot of scoring and a lot of people that can get him the ball in the right spots, I think he's gonna have a really good year.
That's probably the safest bet out of the group, I think. Honestly, Jordan Poole could potentially even still be the biggest surprise if he gets like unleashed Jordan Poole and the guy he looked like when Steph Curry didn't play. I'm gonna like totally take an off the wall one here and say Danilo Gallinari. Maybe he comes back healthy and looks good enough in this sort of setting that he rehabs some value and they can actually turn him into some pieces at the trade deadline or something like that. If he's fully healthy at the beginning of the year here, which I think is an if, I wouldn't totally rule out the idea of him starting at the 4 and Kuzma starting at the 3 again, just to give them a little length, and maybe Gallinari gives you a little bit more shooting next to somebody like Gafford. So I don't know that would happen or if that's realistic or not, but I wouldn't mind seeing at least that group out there together at some point. All right, so Beamy Ball asks, why do people think this team will only win 10 to 15 games? I think anyone who thinks that is stupid and has a bad grasp of basketball personally. Vegas knows. I think the line is at 24 or 24.5. So that's probably the safe bet because somebody can predict the future. But 10 games is insane. 15 games is pretty crazy. There's so much parity in the NBA right now. They're going to be young. They're going to be hungry. And some of these teams, especially at the end of the year, are not going to want to win games, and the Wizards might not care if they do. So at the very least, This is a 20 to 25-ish win team, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I don't understand why so many people are so down on the Wizards. Like, I understand we're not trying to win the title. Like, we don't have a championship roster, but like at the end of the day, we're not going to be that bad. We're not going to be like the process Sixers where we're bottoming out. Like, we have legit players on our team. Jordan Poole was one of the key contributors 2 years ago on a championship. He's only 24. He's still getting better. Kyle Kuzma, yet again, 3-4 years ago, also key contributor on a championship team. Tyus Jones, also on a great team the last couple of years. Like, we're not that bad. I understand. Like, I still think teams like the Rockets, the Pistons, maybe not the Rockets now, but like Charlotte, Detroit, they're definitely going to be worse than us. I don't think we're going to be that bad. I don't think we're going to be winning 40+ games and making the playoffs. But look, if we win 35 games this year, same thing we did the last 2 years, but this year is going to feel a little different because we're not winning 35 games in the hopes of winning 52. We're winning 35 games in the hopes of winning 35 games because we're trying to build our roster the right way. So I think it's ridiculous for people to think we're going to be that bad. Not going to win the title, but we're also not going to be the worst team in the league.
I'm hammering a 24.5 win over. I know I'm the negative Wizards fan here, but I'm hammering that. Absolutely.
I'm with you.
All right. Let's see. What will the attendance be like at Capital One Arena this year? A question from Bimmy Ball. I think probably similar to last year. Honestly, I think it'll probably be good early in the year. People will be excited to see the young guys, and eventually it'll trail off when people realize, like, oh, actually they're bad. But that's sort of my gut, and that's really how it plays out every year. So I don't think they'll be like fifth from the bottom in attendance, is my guess.
Yeah, I mean, when they're good, there's something like they sometimes they don't sell out playoff games. Like, a lot of times, as a Washington fan, especially being a Commanders fan as well, I've been to a lot of home games that felt like neutral site or road games, and that's one of the down parts of being a Washington fan at this moment. Like, being a Penn State student, all the football games all sold out. It's the first time I've ever been to a sporting event where like it's a genuine home game from a team I'm rooting for. Because I went to the Hawks game last year at Capital One, and like the Hawks don't have great fans, but it was probably 20 to 25% Hawks fans. Especially when you watch games like against the Lakers and the Warriors, it's like pretty much home games for those teams. And I understand they have a bunch of front runners and a bunch of bandwagon fans that travel. DC is a very diverse place, a lot of different people moving in, so it's not always easy to keep your fan base in that area per se, but like it would be nice to where, maybe if this team does start getting good, we start getting and seeing some attendance. I think I like you mentioned, I agree. Earlier in the year, it's gonna be great. When I went to the home opener 3 years ago against Indiana, unreal crowd. But as the team starts to trail off, I think you'll see the attendance numbers fall as well.
You're breaking up a little bit on us there, Greg. So we'll just kind of keep these moving and close us out here with the last couple. Clubba Bubba asked about what to do with Gallinari. I touched on that one a little bit. He asked about is Poole a long-term piece for them, and also wanted to know about lineups with Kyle Kuzma at the 5. So any initial thoughts on either of those things?
I mean, I hope Gallo stays. I heard we might buy him out, but I wouldn't mind him as a small ball 5. I think he played a little bit in OKC and he excelled there, so I like him. He can really stretch the floor. In terms of Kuzma, I don't like him playing that big. Me personally, I wouldn't even mind him playing small forward as opposed to power forward. I think he can defend, pretty versatile. Like he can guard 1 through 4. I'm not a big fan of him guarding the 5. He has the size to do it, but I think he'd get bullied down low, and I'm not here for it.
Yeah, maybe against like the Warriors super small ball lineup, or like somebody else's backup bigs. That's okay, but I wouldn't want him guarding anybody's like legitimate 5. So I'm with you. Jordan Poole to me is either a long-term piece or he isn't. It doesn't really matter. You have the next couple of years to figure that out, and we'll see how he looks. I think it's kind of too early to answer if he's a building block for them or not.
I agree.
All right, last question we have from Darius Singh Perhala here. 2 to 3 reasonable milestones for a successful season. I'm going to go first on this one if you don't care, Greg. I think for me, it's really simple.
Question.
Did any of the young guys get better? That's number 1. 2, did we let the young guys play? And 3, the older guys that aren't in their long-term plans, did we flip them for assets? If they do those 3 things, I'm calling this a successful season.
I mean, I totally agree. Like, if I had to name my own, Johnny Davis, that would be one of them. Johnny Davis's development. If I see Johnny Davis as a legit rotational player, and I don't need him to average 15 a game, I just need 6 to 8, maybe 10 points per game. Really solid defender. When you play him, he contributes to the team. He does his job well. That's something I'm really looking forward to. Number 2, Wes Unseld Jr. I think he's on the clock. I think I want to see a lot better from him in terms of rotations, in terms of adjusting, in terms of game planning, just everything out of him. I've been very disappointed with what I've seen the first 2 years. Hopefully, the decreased pressure on him helps him a little bit more, not feeling like he has to play certain guys because of their contracts or because of outside pressures to play them, especially from guys like the GM. But that's the second thing. And third, Jordan Poole, Kyle Kuzma, those are 2 guys that I've heard a lot of rumors you can flip them later. I want them to play well, and I want to see if they can really contribute and really be those go-to guys on our team. I don't know if they're necessarily number 1 options yet, but I think they can be in the future. So I'm excited to see all 3 of those things.
Greg, always the most important question of the show. Where can people find your work?
You can find me at Bullets Forever. I also have my own blog called Wizards Wave. I'll post there occasionally, some more personal Wizards content. And you can follow me on Twitter at Greg Finberg, GregFinberg. And that's the best place to follow me.
If you're not following Greg, you've been like the key aggregator of all Wizards related news all summer. So that's been my first stop for anything Wizards related. So I hope everybody, if you're not following Greg, get your shit together and go do that right away here. Greg, thanks, man. Appreciate you jumping on. Again, I mentioned at the beginning, this was last minute. So kudos to you for making this work. I owe you one.
No problem, man.
And hopefully we'll just have some more good stuff to talk about here over the summer. I think hopefully that's it for today. If you have more mailbaggy type questions while it's kind of this dead period, let us know. We'll hit those in future episodes. Jahadi and I will probably get something, either later this week, early this weekend, or beginning of next week, and go from there. As always, this is Believe in Wizards. Rate, review, subscribe. Hit that little subscribe button on the YouTube page for us. Even if you don't know what YouTube is and you're only an audio podcast person, we still appreciate it. And we are presented by Betonline.ag, and we will catch you all next time.